Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Fleck, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD experts presentation titled Toxic Red Flags and Interventions for Teens with ADHD. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Stephanie Moulton Sarkis. Dr. Sarkis is a psychotherapist who specializes in helping people with ADHD who have suffered with toxic relationships, gaslighting, and anxiety disorders. Based in Tampa, Florida, she has been in private practice for more than 20 years. Dr. Sarkis is a national certified counselor, a licensed mental health counselor, and a Florida Supreme Court certified family and circuit court mediator. She is the author of several books and host of the Talking Brains podcast. Adolescents with ADHD are more likely to be in toxic relationships than their neurotypical peers. This can be due to low self-esteem, lagging maturity and development, difficulty connecting with peers, and other manifestations of ADHD. In today's webinar, we'll discuss what makes a relationship toxic and how to support a teen's well-being. Caregivers will learn how to help their teens identify signs of a troubled relationship and how to end it and recover. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Play Attention. Research conducted at Tufts University School of Medicine demonstrates that Play Attention improves attention, emotion regulation, executive function, and overall performance. Harnessing cutting-edge NASA-inspired technology, Play Attention offers a customized program for children and adults. Your dedicated personal executive function coach will tailor a plan for each family member to improve executive function and self-regulation. Home and professional programs are available. Contact Play Attention at 828-676-2240 or click the link on screen to schedule your free consultation and live demo. Visit www.playattention.com to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Stephanie Sarkis. Thank you so much for joining us today and leading this discussion.
Thank you, Carol, and thanks for everyone that's attending today, or you may be watching this later. And thank you also for the team at Attitude for making this such a streamlined process. It's really helpful as a speaker, so thank you. So we'll be talking about toxic relationships in teens and young adults with ADHD. You may be here, it looks like based on the information I was given, that a lot of you are here because you do have a child with ADHD, and whether they're transitioning into being a teenager or transitioning into young adulthood, they may run into people that don't have their best interests in mind. So we'll talk a little bit about why people with ADHD are more prone to being in toxic relationships. And then we'll also talk about what to do about that, especially when it's your kid, because there are some issues that come up for kids with ADHD that have been in an unhealthy relationship that may not be present for other kids. So this is a little bit about myself. Carol already went through all this. My website, stephaniesarkis.com, you can go to resources, and there's a tab that will say books on gaslighting, books on toxic relationships, books on ADHD. You can click on those and it takes you through to Amazon. Also on the blog tab, there are Psychology Today articles about ADHD, gaslighting, narcissistic abuse as well, and the podcast episodes too. So we're going to talk about what gaslighting is and what toxic relationships are, why people with ADHD are more vulnerable, why it's hard to leave this type of relationship, especially when you have ADHD, and how we can help young adults and teenagers rebuild after they've gone no contact or low contact. No contact isn't always possible, especially if they go to school with someone or they're in an organization where this person also attends that. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that and how to navigate when the person is still going to see the person on a daily basis. So gaslighting is a form of manipulation where the perpetrator, and I'll call it perpetrator and victim for the purposes of our talk. So where the perpetrator tells the victim that they're crazy, that they can't trust themselves, that everyone else thinks they're crazy, that their family's no good. And the victim tends to start questioning their own sanity and relying on the perpetrator for their version of reality. So one of the main things that they do is they will say, well, your parents don't care about you and they're just going to try and tear us apart. So when you inevitably say, hey, this relationship, in a loving way, you say, hey, this relationship, I don't think this is healthy for you. We really need to talk about this. They've already gotten the messages usually from the gaslighter that they should not listen to you. So that's something to keep in mind, that you are going to have some pushback because the gaslighter knows ahead of time that you are going to be the loving parent that says, hey, this isn't working. And so they want to get out ahead of that and isolate your child as much as possible. So one of the main ways they do this is say that what the victim saw and heard isn't what really happened. They will hide items, like an item of great sentimental or monetary value. They'll hide that item and then blame the person's ADHD. They'll say, well, if you didn't have ADHD, you wouldn't be so, distractible. You wouldn't be so bad of a partner. And they will weaponize ADHD, depression, and anxiety against the person. They will accuse the victim of cheating. They will get obsessive about checking the person's phone, accusing them of cheating, when in fact, the gaslighter is prone to cheating because of the insatiable need for attention from people. They will also hoover the victim when the victim tries to leave. So think hoover like the vacuum cleaner. They try to suck somebody back in the relationship. So they will promise them things. They will tell them, I've changed. They usually never apologize because they have an issue with taking personal responsibility for their behavior. But they will lure the victim back in. And once the victim goes back into the relationship, it's just as pathological as before. There is a time period of a honeymoon phase, a love bombing phase, where the person is told how wonderful they are and how different things are. But then it goes right back into the cycle of pathology. So this hoovering can be very powerful, especially when someone's given gifts or they're promised things and they're told what a wonderful person they are. They're the best person this person's ever met. And especially for someone with ADHD who might have low self-esteem or difficulty with friendships, having somebody tell you you're the best person ever is especially intoxicating for people with ADHD. They finally feel a sense of acceptance. And I just talked about love bombing again, being in a relationship is too good to be true, putting a lot of pressure on someone for commitment, triangulating. The partner knows that you are going to probably step in and say this relationship isn't healthy. So they will say to the victim, your parents, I don't really like them. They're mean to you. They're abusive to you, even though you've had no signs of abuse. And again, they will try to isolate your child away from you. And they know, again, that you are the first line of defense to get to the victim, right? So they're going to make sure that they discredit you. Splitting, so you're either all good or all bad. So they will pit people into this person's lower than dirt, or this is the best person ever. There's no gray area. There's no middle ground. If you cross them, you are now a terrible person. There's no subtleties. There's no nuances. This can be seen in narcissistic personality disorder and other similar personality disorders. Diagnostically, we don't diagnose those until someone is 18, but you can have tendencies towards that. You can also have this behavior without a diagnosable disorder. So you may meet your kid's partner and they may seem pretty healthy, right? They may seem like they come from a good family, but that may also be a lot of masking. So you may see that this person still has pathological behaviors, even though they present to you as pretty healthy. This type of person is very good at establishing a good image for themselves. Even at a young age, they know that they need to portray themselves as being okay, for lack of a better word. And again, behind closed doors, it's a totally different person. And that's part of why it's hard for people to leave, is because the public persona that their partner has is completely different to what the personal persona is. So victims are very concerned that no one's going to believe them because this person is so beloved by people. They're a pillar of the community. So it's very hard to leave. Most people will leave about 6 times before they leave for good. So a toxic relationship isn't just people having a disagreement. There's a difference between arguing and fighting. Arguing is when you're in a relationship, you have conflicts about, where one of you wants to go to the store, when, all that stuff. And we aren't really taught how to communicate effectively in a relationship. So part of it is just letting people know what our needs are, doing active listening. This is not that. This is where someone has a pattern of this behavior in their relationships. They have manipulated people in order to get what they need. They are not clear about what their intentions are. They are very stealth with those. They're very covert with their behavior. So you may see someone, again, that portrays themselves as being pretty pulled together, but they have some real pathological behaviors. So people can experience this not only intimate partner relationships, but family and friends. Especially teenage girls can get very covert with bullying. My dissertation study where I looked at pediatric ADHD with comorbid disorders, so disorders that went along with ADHD. It turns out that in my study, girls with ADHD were more likely to be oppositional defiant than boys with ADHD. And that kind of went against the research at the time that girls can actually be more oppositional, can bully more than boys. They just tend to be sneakier. They tend to be more covert with it. So that's something we need to watch too. And also incidences of domestic violence are underreported in boys and men because of the stigma of being told, well, she's only 5 feet tall. How could she hurt you? People can inflict a lot of damage on people. It's not just physical. It's also emotional and verbal. So we need to believe people when they tell us that they've experienced this type of behavior. So also, you see teenagers that are in the workplace that are being harassed by their employer, being harassed by coworkers. So this isn't just an intimate partner relationships, although that will be a focus of today. Just be aware that this happens in other places too. It may be in the family of origin. There may be an extended family member that picks on your child. And again, they can be very stealth about this. And it's not until you walk into a room and see this happening that you're aware of this person targeting your child. So it may be that this person is deliberately trying to gain power and control. Some people have what I call bad brain wiring, and they get a dopamine boost or serotonin boost, those feel-good neurotransmitters. They get that from manipulating, controlling people. Most people get them from playing with our kids, petting our dogs or cats, doing a good job at work. That's where we get our dopamine and serotonin boost, but they get it from power and control. People may also be repeating patterns they learned from their family of origin. They may have had parents that were manipulative or did gaslighting behaviors. Either way, the perpetrator is still 100% responsible for their behavior, regardless of their age, regardless of how they came to that behavior. So because one of the things that the perpetrator does is say, well, I've had trauma, my family, I had parents that did this, that, and this. That's fine, but they're still responsible for their behavior and they still need to stop the behavior. But that's one of the ways that they lure the victim back in is by saying, well, I came from this bad family. Okay, but that doesn't mean they need to stay together for that person to work on their stuff. Also, this is a slow process. So it may be that your kid's excited because they met somebody, and then 6 months later, you start noticing that maybe there's not as much sparkle to them. They seem to be dulled a little bit. Their personality seems to be blunted. They are not the kid that you used to know because this process of abuse is slow. There's a purpose in that, and that when you have a perpetrator, meaning a victim, they want to make sure the victim is locked into the relationship through love bombing, also known as idealization. And then they start picking at them. And then the devaluing process starts. So they start picking on your child's body type, what they wear, who they talk to. And again, they will try to pull your kid away from your family, away from their friends as much as possible, because to them, to isolate is to gain ultimate power and control over them. Again, this is a pattern of relationships. Now, your kid's partner may say, I've never had this kind of issue in a relationship before. Oh, yeah, they have. This has been an issue they've had before in relationships with power and control. Again, ADHD will be weaponized. They'll say, well, if it wasn't for your ADHD, our relationship would be fine. And that's not true. This is a function of a pathological person. The people that engage in this behavior, they may seek out people that are younger than them. And the reason for that is that people that are younger are more vulnerable and easier to control. They're more what's called amenable to coercion. So you may see a relationship between a 19-year-old and a 15-year-old because a 15-year-old, you haven't as much life experience and you are more likely to be manipulated by someone because they may have been practiced in this manipulation behavior. Also, toxic people tend to resist getting help. They don't own their behavior usually. When I do have people contact me and say that they've been gaslighting people, it's usually because they identify that their family had this type of behavior. and they've been told by a partner or a friend, hey, you really need to get help for this. It's destroying your relationships. And then they may get help and continue to do that for quite a while. But again, there are a portion of people that purposely seek out power and control. And also the best option is to cut ties completely with a toxic person. That means blocking emails, blocking them on Snapchat, all the different apps that kids use. Now I'm getting older and I don't really recall all the apps because it seems like they change. So I'm officially old now. So, but blocking any kind of social media, maybe your kid needs to delete their social media, which when you ask some kids to do that, they look at you like you've asked them to cut their head off. But it's really important that they do no longer expose themselves to this person on social media, because this person will find what's called new supply, a new person to siphon off energy from, and they will post pictures of that person and say they've never felt like this about someone before. It's the first time I've been in love. And part of the reason why they're doing that is to punish your child, to make your child want to talk to them. So it's really important that social media is shut down. And that means if you have a teenager, monitoring what they're doing with their phones. And teenagers tend to not like that, right? They want their privacy. But there has been a triggering event that it's smart for you to check their phone. Because if you find that this person is using Google numbers or faking who they are, making up Snapchat accounts to try and get to your kid, you need to be aware of what they're doing. There are also features like a texting feature where you need to give permission for your child to receive a text from someone. So that's available through different phone carriers. There's different ways that you can protect your kids. But you have to keep in mind that in the ADHD brain, in the frontal lobe, that there's not as much maturation in the frontal lobe as in kids without ADHD. Also, kids even without ADHD don't have a lot of frontal lobe maturation. That's why when we were teenagers, we did stuff that we go, oh, that probably wasn't smart, right? Because we don't have that floodgate. So speaking as a person with ADHD, first, we don't have that floodgate because of ADHD. And then we definitely don't have that floodgate because teenagers, and the frontal lobe of the brain doesn't wire up until about 26. And it seems like every time there's research that comes out, that number is getting older and older. So we expect teenagers to not have good thought processes and to not think through things, especially with ADHD. If you look at Barkley's research, kids with ADHD are 2/3 of chronological age behavior-wise. So you may have a 15-year-old that acts like a really good 12 or 13-year-old. So you need to keep that in mind, that you have kids that are being exposed to all these different apps, online stuff, that they may not be able to think clearly or to fully process what their behavioral consequences could be. So we really need to check in on them. So this is a trauma bonding cycle. So trauma bonding, this is one of the reasons why it makes it so difficult to leave these relationships. And again, people leave on average 6 times and go back. And then eventually they leave. So love bombing, you're told you're the best thing ever. Who doesn't want to hear that? But especially for someone with ADHD, they may have never been told this before. This is the first time they felt like they really fit with somebody. Devaluing. Again, this is a slow process. All of a sudden they're told, you know what, if you're a little bit taller, that would make you a little more attractive to me, or you need to lose weight, or you need to gain weight. Again, one of the first things they go after is body type. Next, they go into violence. Now, that could be physical violence or emotional violence. Emotional abuse, like gaslighting, is known as the invisible form of abuse, because just like verbal abuse, we don't see that. That's usually the gateway form of abuse. So if there's emotional abuse or verbal abuse, there's a really good chance it may segue into physical abuse. And that can happen overnight. You may have someone that is physically verbally and emotionally abusive, and your kid says no to them or sets a limit, and it can kick into physical abuse really quickly. Then you have the victim tries to leave. They try to set limits. Don't contact me. We're done. And there may be a period of quietness, but then the person starts hoovering, and they may start coming around your house. They may start walking by your kid's classroom. They may start showing up places where your child didn't expect them to be. And if they do start talking to your child, they will, again, create a very good story to get pity from your child and to reconnect. And then we get back into love bombing, and then we get back into devaluing. So this cycle continues. Every time you go through the cycle, when you go through the love bombing phase, we get a boost of dopamine and also oxytocin. Oxytocin is the cuddle hormone. And then when there's the violent part and the conflict part, then we get adrenaline and cortisol. Cortisol is a stress-producing hormone. And then you go back up into the cycle. So our brains get hooked on this cycle of dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, cortisol. So when someone leaves this type of relationship, it can be almost like a drug withdrawal. It's a much more intense breakup than other people. And if we combine that with the fact that people with ADHD may have rejection sensitive dysphoria, which means that they're more sensitive to rejection, you add that to the fact that here's someone that has manipulated them. You may have kids that may have suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts. We really need to keep a close eye on them. Again, self-esteem issues make people more prone. I think people with ADHD, we tend to look for the best in people. We have difficulty maintaining friendships and relationships, lack of acceptance from other people. We're more likely to have a history of trauma, including child abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, first relationship for a lot of these kids. And so that hits pretty hard for a lot of them. And also, they may have been told not to trust their intuition. If you've been told that there's something wrong with your brain, when you get that icky feeling from somebody, or as kids call it, the ick now, they may ignore that. They may say, you know what, I'm not going to trust that because I really like this person and I've been told there's something wrong with my brain. And so I'm not going to trust that feeling. We really need to teach kids that if something feels icky, it usually is. And we need to extract ourselves from that situation. Also, again, more likely to have a history of abuse. And if you have a history of abuse, you're more likely to be in an abusive relationship. There's also a cycle of guilt and shame when you have ADHD of why can't I sit at a desk and study like my peers? Why can't I not interrupt people when they're talking? And that cycle of guilt and shame carries over into relationships. So when the perpetrator says, you know, why can't you just be a good partner? A person with ADHD really takes that to heart and sees it as a personal flaw of theirs rather than thinking, wow, this person's a jerk for saying that, right? So that's one of the things we really need to watch is that people with ADHD tend to internalize criticism. They tend to internalize the abuse rather than saying this person's just a jerk and I need to get away from them. Also, people with ADHD tend to unconsciously pick out someone that seems pulled together because they can be the other side of us, right? So particularly for adults, if they meet somebody that seems to be financially got all their ducks in a row, they have all their paperwork done, they turn their taxes on time. Someone with ADHD may say, you know what? That's what I'm looking for in a partner. They're pulled together. But the flip side of being pulled together is they can be controlling. Also, ADHD relationships usually start out pretty intensely because when you get two ADHD people together, especially, it's like spontaneous combustion. But also toxic relationships start out that way too. I've been asked, what's the difference between the beginning of an ADHD relationship and the beginning of a toxic relationship? With a toxic relationship, it's much more intense. Again, there's a much more of a push for commitment. There may already be some signs of verbal or emotional abuse in the beginning. And again, everyone's vulnerable to toxic people, but people with ADHD are more at risk. Here's some quotes from some of my teen and young adult clients. He would tell me I was the best thing ever happened to him. He started yelling at me or started telling me I need to lose weight and told me my clothes were too revealing. He told me my parents were abusive and didn't care about me, and he was the only one who truly cared about me. She told me that no one would believe me if I told them she was abusive. She said girls can't be abusive, and she was just reacting to me being abusive. This is very common. The perpetrator will accuse your child of being abusive, will accuse your child of being a gaslighter. What they're doing is they're projecting their own behavior onto someone else. He told me ADHD didn't exist, and I was just lazy and selfish. Whenever I took my medicine, he told me it was a way for my family to control me. I have had cases where the client's partner took their medication and flushed it. They took it for themselves. And in those cases, the parents have filed a police report against the person for taking their child's medicine. So luckily, that's in the minority of cases I work with or clients I work with. But using ADHD to weaponize against someone is something that I do see quite commonly. So my parents told me she was not healthy for me to be around. She told me they would try to pull us apart and that they didn't believe in true love. I come to my own conclusion that things were not going to get better in my relationship. A lot of times it has to be the kid that has to come to terms with the fact that this is not healthy. Especially with young adults, you may see that they tend to hold on tighter to the partner if you tell them that this is not healthy for them. The more my parents stopped me from seeing him, the more I found ways to see him. So there's a little bit of an ADHD oppositional challenge to that. It almost became like a challenge. He encouraged me to defy them. My parents found out how bad things were when they saw bruises on my arm. I had been wearing long sleeve shirts. They wouldn't see the marks. Again, this type of relationship can go from emotional abuse to physical abuse very quickly. So going no contact is the most effective solution. Again, social media needs to be cut off. And maybe that friends in common also need to be blocked because they will share pictures of the partner. It's really important not to initiate communication and also not respond to anything. The classic thing that they will do is they will message your kid and just say, hey, because they're trying to test the waters to see if your kid's going to respond. Or they will even send pictures of their new partner and say, hey, this, they're everything that you couldn't be, or something like that, because they don't care what kind of attention they're getting, whether it's positive or negative. They just want to siphon the attention from your kid. No contact isn't always possible. However, if there's been violence, if there's been a threat of violence, you may be able to get a restraining order injunction. I would recommend talking to a family law attorney if that's the case. Also, keep in mind that your teen or young adult may return to the relationship because unfortunately the trauma bond can be very hard to break. But it's really important to, as much as it's hard to do this, but to be non-judgmental and keep open communication, because that's how you'll get your kid back, is by keeping open communication. And sometimes when you say stuff that's bad about their partner, they will defend them to the hilt. So it's really important to maybe say, hey, I really love you. It seems like things have changed. You don't seem as happy. I wonder, if you've noticed that too. And just having a dialogue with them without pointing out what a jerk their partner is can be really helpful, even though you really want to tell them what a jerk their partner is. And they may know their partner's a jerk, but if you bring that up, they're going to get defensive. So we do need to monitor phone use, especially when this type of relationship has happened. Keep the tracking feature on so you can see where your kid is at. If they turn the tracking feature off or refuse to use it, they get their phone taken away. Also, you can turn off data service to your kids' phones after a certain time. You can contact your cell phone provider about that. Again, approach with non-judgment, open communication style. Even if you really want to be judgmental, you got to really put a curb on that. And you can be judgmental with someone else, like tell your friends or your partner. You can be judgmental then, but when you talk to your kid, being judgmental about their partner will backfire. Understand that kids with ADHD are going to have more issues post-relationship, especially these types of relationships than non-ADHD teens. We're going to have to really watch them for suicidal behavior. We're going to need to watch them for self-harming. We need to check in with them, not just right after this happened, but we need to ask them how they're doing at different points throughout, even just in the next few years. Also, a strong sense of justice can cause your teenager to rebel, especially if you tell them, hey, this person's not good for you. I don't want you seeing them anymore. They sometimes will come up with reasons why they need to continue this relationship. Sometimes kids, teenagers, young adults with ADHD will get into a rescuing mode where they will say, but they need me. They've been through so much. And it's really important to point out that somebody experiencing bad times does not mean that you're the one that needs to fix it. Fixing is not your job. Supporting, maybe, but fixing is not your job. And also, again, if you have ADHD with a little sprinkling of oppositional defiant disorder, you may see they're starting to break rules. They're sneaking out at night. So it's important that we really keep tabs on what kids are doing. So 43% of college women report experiencing violent and abusive dating behaviors, quite a high number. 1 in 3 college women say that they've been in an abusive dating relationship. The university or college counseling center can have individual or group therapy. Also, the Title IX office, which all campuses are required to have. The Title IX says that your child is supposed to be protected from sexual harassment and sexual violence on campus. And if there's an open criminal investigation, let's say there are going to be charges pressed, that does not relieve the university from doing their own investigation or resolving complaints. So Title IX, how that office works depends from campus to campus. Hopefully they would follow the federal law. So this is one of the things that helps protect your kids. So Title IX, so you can look that up online. OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, has great information online about Title IX and how that works and how you report to the university. So we need to look at the fact that physical violence is a very real possibility when there's been any type of emotional or physical abuse or any kind of emotional or verbal abuse. There's also financial economic abuse where the person will demand money. from your child. They will make your child financially dependent on them. They will tell your child that they don't need to work while they're at school, that they'll help pay for their costs. And so then that leads to the person becoming financially dependent on the perpetrator. This greatly increases chance of being killed. There's an organization called One Love that talks about healthy relationships and how to stay away from abusive relationships, both in high school and college. And that was started by a couple that their daughter was killed by her college boyfriend. They did have a history of domestic violence. So they've created this One Love Foundation based on that to educate people about what a healthy relationship is. Also, if someone has access to a firearm, that increases the chance of homicide by 10 times. Any type of choking or strangulation that's occurred in a relationship infinitely increases the chances that there's going to be homicide in this relationship. Also, a toxic person or abuser may threaten to harm your family, pets, if the victim leaves. And when your child leaves this relationship, that's when you really need to keep tabs on what's going on, because this is the most lethal time. And again, if there have been threats, it's possible you may need an injunction or a restraining order. The name of it depends on your court jurisdiction. But talk to a family law attorney and they can tell you about the steps for that. So again, kids with ADHD may be suicidal, have lower self-worth after this relationship ends. Again, they may try to suck in your kid through social media to hoover them back in, even just of any kind of contact. And you may have friends, mutual friends, that will go up to your kid and say, oh, so-and-so really misses you. They really wish you're part of their life. They've been so sad. It's important for your kid to say to them, hey, that's a no-fly zone. We're not going to talk about that person. And if this person continues to talk about them, your child needs to walk away, which can be really hard, but you can practice role plays with this. So you can practice with your kid what it looks like to say to somebody no and walking away from them. I find role plays to be very helpful. So role play could be that you're the flying monkey and they're themselves, and then you switch roles. So now they're the flying monkey and you're them, right? So you teach them how to respond this way. And the more they've practiced it, the easier it gets if that happens. They're called flying monkeys because in Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West sent messages via flying monkey. So it's really important that the kids have consistent treatment for ADHD. We need to make sure they're taking their medicine, especially because they may have a partner that's telling them they don't need it. Therapy is very important. Cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavior therapy and studies have been found to be quite effective for ADHD. Also, someone that has specialization in treating trauma can be essential. Family support, again, trying to be as non-judgmental as possible, eliminating contact with toxic people in extended family. And maybe you need to look at the family, your family, extended family, and see if there's anybody in your extended family that may not be healthy for your child to be around. And you may find that some people in your family are enabling that person. So it may be that you need to limit your time in family gatherings, and maybe that you really need to not have your child around those people, because once you understand what a toxic person is, you may start noticing them in other places. And that also means being careful about your friends and who you're associating with or your partner to make sure that that behavior isn't being seen in any of your close circle, because your kid watches you like a hawk. So if they see that someone's not treating you well, it sends a message that this is how people treat each other. So we have to be really careful about who we associate with. So abuse is abuse is abuse. Talk about warning signs early, what a healthy relationship looks like. There's equal give and take. There's mutual courtesy and respect. You can disagree about stuff, but you still treat each other with kindness. And also there are flexible, clear, and rigid boundaries. Flexible boundaries are ones that kind of move around, that it's like people-pleasing behavior. Well, I don't want this person to be upset with me, so I'm going to say yes to this thing, but I really don't want to do it. Rigid boundaries are, I'm not changing my boundaries for anybody. And that can result in a wall where people can't get through to you. But clear boundaries are, hey, I've got some pretty clear boundaries, but it may change based on the person or my age or my situation. And I can check in with those boundaries and change them as time goes on. Also, LGBTQIA plus teens and young adults, they're more likely to experience domestic violence. They're less likely to reach out for help or report due to homophobia and also lack of resources. There is an organization called The Network that helps specifically LGBTQIA plus teens and young adults to talk about issues with domestic violence or relationship issues. There's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And also, if your child's being harassed in the workplace, there's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's definition of harassment. So you can find that at that link. So the more time that your teen or young adult spends away from this unhealthy person, the better chance that they will go on to having healthy relationships and to go on to move on from that relationship. Education and going to counseling is key. And again, it needs to be a mental health professional, licensed mental health professional. And again, having someone that specializes in ADHD and also trauma is very helpful. And it may be that you have to try out a couple different therapists to find one that your kid really clicks with. That's pretty normal. And it may be that you need to go to therapy as well, because this can be really traumatic for the entire family system. So any questions that you have? Sounds like we had quite a few questions.
We had lots of questions, which I will get to in just a minute. But thank you, Dr. Sarkis. That was such important information and guidance. We appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to thank Play Attention once more for sponsoring this webinar. I'd also like to share the final results from today's poll question. If your teen was in a toxic relationship, what were the signs that something was amiss? And here's what you said. 22% said sudden changes in behavior or mood. 20% said secretive behavior. 19% said reluctance to discuss their relationship. 16% said changes in academic performance. And 14% said withdrawal from hobbies or activities. I'm sure you've heard all of those.
It can look a lot like depression. And that's something to keep in mind, is that you have kids dropping their activities, dropping interests. So it's really important, regardless of the origin of that, we really need to start talking to our kids about what's going on. And that's where open communication is key.
Okay. So we got lots of questions. The first one is there a turning point at which a relationship turns toxic when it starts out seemingly healthy and then until it isn't?
That's the love bombing phase. So I would argue that the entire thing's toxic, but in the beginning, it can fool people because you have the perpetrator telling the person that they're everything they've ever wanted, that they're the best person ever. And again, for someone with ADHD that's never been told that or has never felt like they were a part of something, that can be very intoxicating and can pull them in really quickly. And then the devaluing starts. So if there's a relationship where it just seems like it's coming on too strong, the partner wants to spend way too much time with your child, then you deem to be pretty healthy, that's a tip off. So again, it starts out with love bombing, and that can be way overboard. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So most of these relationships start out with that. Usually do not immediately start out with emotional, verbal, physical abuse.
Okay. A mom writes, our tween daughter has a toxic best friend. She feels trapped to stay in the relationship because she doesn't have any other friends. Do you have advice for parents to help navigate when a child with ADHD, anxiety, depression would rather stay in a toxic relationship than have no friends at all?
I think it's important, again, to have open communication and talk about what this friend's behavior is and your child's feelings about not having a lot of friends. And maybe look at what are some avenues that your child has for finding other friends, maybe belonging to a group, participating in an after-school club, giving your child other options for friends. And it may be that you need to stop having contact with this person. That I'm always an advocate for getting to know your kids' friends' parents. And if you think something's wrong at home, that might not be a good person for your kid to hang around. So it may be that you also have to just put your foot down and say, this isn't working and you can't be around this person anymore. It also gives your kid an out. So if that child says, well, how come you're not talking to me anymore? How come you don't message me anymore? You can say, well, my parents have kind of grounded me. They can just blame you. They can throw you under the bus. And that's also effective too, because if it's the parent's fault, then sometimes the toxic kid kind of backs off.
Okay. We had quite a few questions around sons. The first one is, can you talk about boys who identify with the male perpetrator?
Sure. That happens quite a bit. Boys and girls can identify with a perpetrator. And I think it's important to look at, again, open communication, non-judgmental, even though that can be hard, and figure out what was the origin of this. And I think that's where a licensed mental health professional can be very helpful to figure out, is this something that there's an underlying level of anger about something or someone, or what is the origin? And once we can kind of tap away at the origin of it, we can start talking about what are healthier behaviors to have and why is there a need for power and control. Sometimes when there's a need for power and control, it's because there's something that's out of control in that child's life and they're trying to grasp some semblance of having control over their life.
Well, that's interesting because that goes to the next question. How can I get my teen son to be less controlling?
I think, again, we need to look at what's the origin of the behavior. And it may be, maybe at school, things are feeling out of control, or maybe they're being bullied at school. We really need to look at what the origin of that is. And also, who are the adults that they're around? Are those adults displaying controlling behaviors? Again, kids watch adults like a hawk for how they're supposed to behave.
Someone writes, my husband and teen have a toxic relationship. How can I turn this around?
The tricky part about doing family therapy is you want to make sure that the toxic adult doesn't try to act as the victim, which can happen. So you need a therapist that is well aware of how that dynamic works. And it might be that you need to go to therapy to figure out why this is happening or why you're tolerating it from your partner. Because my guess is your partner is not just doing this with your child, they're also doing it with other people, including maybe you. And again, I can't speak specifically to your situation, but it might be really helpful for you to talk to a therapist to figure out what you can do and what your role has been in it. It might be sometimes that parents will just kind of take a step back and just have that play out because they're concerned about being turned on them. But what usually happens is as that child gets older, they start getting mad at the healthier parent because why didn't you protect me against this person? So it does backfire as the children get older. But I would really recommend that either family therapy with someone that's well aware of what that dynamic looks like, and so they can call it out, and also doing individual therapy for yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
great.
Your child.
Yeah, we have a few questions around that, so that's very helpful. How can parents intervene when their child is a young adult who is in a toxic relationship and living on their own?
So we need to look at what's reasonable expectations. So can we stop someone from seeing someone when they're an adult? No, you can't. And the more that we try to say this person's not healthy, you can't be around them, the harder that is. I have seen some parents go the route of financially cutting off their kid when they're continuing a relationship. I don't know if I necessarily recommend that, but that has been done. That's up to you as parents to work that out. But that can lead to actually the child being more dependent on the person. Sometimes parents have taken their child out of the college because of being around that person. But also, it really depends on what you believe as parents, what your parenting style is now to handle that. And again, I keep saying go to a counselor, but this is some heavy duty stuff that it can tear relationships up between you and your partner. So, and it can tear relationships up between co-parents. So again, I think it's really helpful to go into a therapist. If you're separated or divorced and you are co-parenting together, go in to see a couples therapist anyway and talk about how you have different views of what to do about the situation. It's very possible that the perpetrator is really nice to one parent and not nice to the other parent. So that's a really good thing to talk about, to share your perceptions of this. Someone can be different with other people, right? So, because that's a common thing I see with parents is that, well, Johnny's not so bad. He's always respectful to me. Well, no, Johnny called me a name, so that doesn't work for me. And so parents have had very different views. So it's really important that both parents are on the same page and come up with a solution that works best for them.
This is an interesting question from an adult. How do you manage a toxic relationship if the person is your mother or father?
So sometimes it's going no contact, which is not done without a lot of thought and a lot of sadness and grief because you're grieving over who you wanted your parent to be or who they could have been. You're grieving for yourself as a child. But sometimes that's not always possible to do that, or you don't want to. So then it's going low contact, which means limiting time on phone calls. If you're at a family gathering, you have a set time that you spend there. You have someone that goes with you kind of as a buffer in case this person tries to come after you or corner you or tries to criticize you. You can have a nonverbal signal with someone that's with you, like scratching your head, and that means I need to get out now. You can have times where you just have a parent-free holiday. So you go on vacation, you go somewhere where you're not going to have cell service. So it helps to really look at also as parents age, the fact that you are not obligated to be a caretaker for an abusive parent. You may get a lot of pressure from people or even siblings that don't want to caretake for your parent, but you are not obligated to care for a parent that's been abusive and is not taking responsibility for it. And it's really up to you how much you want to get involved. But there can be a lot of guilting and shaming that goes along with you cutting off your parents or limiting your contact or not doing caretaking. But it's really important for your mental health, your physical health, to limit contact. And those people may not understand where you're coming from, but you know what? That doesn't matter because number one is your health and your well-being.
Okay. A primary school teacher says, how can I help our neurodivergent students recognize their overthinking behaviors and allow themselves to be in a friendship without sabotaging it?
That's on a case-by-case basis, I think, and it depends on what the neurodiverse issue is. It really depends if it's ADHD or autism spectrum, but I might be talking with a child one-on-one or referring that child for counseling services to talk about how they may be kind of in their own heads and not able to do reciprocal social behavior. Reciprocal social behavior is the give and take process. So it may be that they need to have more intervention, or it may be that the school counselor has a group about social skills or how to do social interaction or reciprocal interactions. So that's the route I would go. And it also depends on, what your principal and what your school system says about how much you can intervene or discuss boundaries, because that differs by school district usually, or principal.
Okay. A mom says, my child with ADHD, like most teens, has shaky self-esteem. They doubt themselves too often. One of her friends takes advantage of that to convince her she's not as capable as she really is. As a parent, I'm in a too frequent battle with her friends, undermining my child's confidence. What should I do?
I would say, why are those kids around your child? That's where we kind of need to take in a more authoritarian role. So it sounds like you may have an assertive parenting style, which means that your kid has rules, but you also have people trying to undermine those rules. So you may have to go more on the authoritarian with this side and say, you know what, we're going to kind of look at your friend set. And again, I'm talking about teenagers and younger, that I really question why are these people having access to your kid? Now, if they're at school, it's a little more difficult, but it may be that sometimes parents have even changed classes around for kids so they aren't around their peer group as much. Or they've even, in some cases, they've changed schools. And I'm not saying that's always an option for people, but we need to look at why are those kids having access to your kid? And it may be that your kid needs to, you need to be very clear with them that they're not to be around those kids. Sometimes we have to take a more authoritarian role, especially if we feel like our kid's not making good decisions or kids are around peers that our kid's going to succumb to peer pressure.
This is a sort of follow-up to that. My daughter broke up with her toxic friends, but they're gossiping about her. Should I get involved or will it make it worse?
Getting involved what does getting involved look like? If you tell some kids, hey, I don't think you should be talking badly about my kid, they're probably gonna be like, no, I didn't do that. But if you know those kids' parents and you've had a relationship with those parents, you can say, hey, we're having a little bit of an issue. It seems like, that there are some things being said about my kid that aren't true and it's impacting school. Again, it really helps to get to know your kids' friends' parents. Now, that may not be the case. But you are going to have people that are toxic that are going to spread rumors about someone. And usually there's nothing much you can do about it, but it's important not to feed into it. Or sometimes if you confront that kid, they're just going to be like, no, that's not a problem. And maybe you need to go to the administration, depending on how much this has impacted your kid. And especially if it's harassment and bullying.
Okay. This is on the flip side. I think my child might be a narcissist. Is this genetic and what should I do?
Narcissism, if you look at teenagers, a lot of them are narcissists just by developmental stage, because developmental stage, you're individuating or learning how to separate out from your parents. So it could be that behavior was watched from someone. It could be that your kid's being a teenager, because I've raised one and they can lean towards that sometimes. So, I think people have raised teenagers. We need like a special badge or something for raising teens, especially with ADHD. But I think we need to look at overall behavior and how it's impacting us and how it's impacting the family as a whole. And I was getting somewhere with that, and then I lost it, and it was really good. So what's the question again?
Oh my God, I just deleted it from my.
So we'll just say that question solved. Moving right along. And I'll just say to everybody, if you have any questions after this,
it was
go to
the
my
mom.
website, there's a contact button, and you can send me an email if I messed up the answer to your question.
It was the mom who was worried that her kid was a narcissist.
Okay. So I think, again, that's where you get into counseling. I know I've said that over and over again, but sometimes kids will talk to counselors. They may not share stuff with us, but they'll talk with counselors because counselors are a neutral third party. And I think that we also need to look at how are we responding to it, because we need to look at, are we feeding into it by how we respond to it? Like if we get upset about it or we punish about it, sometimes that can actually fuel stuff, especially if kids are AD or ADHD and ODD. So we really need to look at what we're doing. And again, that may be that you need to talk to somebody, because I'm assuming that's a really stressful parenting issue, right? I'm not assuming it is. So again, it might be something to look at, are there issues with co-parenting maybe going on? So we need to not only look at helping ourselves or our kids, but also ourselves.
Another mom says, do people with ADHD do more gaslighting?
I think unintentionally sometimes that I think we're more likely to gaslight ourselves and say, you know what, you're a terrible person. Why can't you do this right? When we need to be more loving and kind towards ourselves. That's that loving kindness practice towards ourselves. So I think we're more likely to gaslight ourselves and other people. I think that we do forget sometimes what we've said to someone, and that's not gaslighting. Gaslighting is you're intentionally trying to make someone feel like they're going crazy. So yeah, I can see there's probably a small percentage, right? Because we're not just ADHD, we have other facets to ourselves. But I think just from a purely ADHD standpoint, I think sometimes if that happens is because we really don't remember stuff. Or we tend to try to figure out what's going on in our own lives because we're trying to straighten that out. So we may not really look at how something is impacting someone else. That doesn't mean we're narcissists. It doesn't mean we're gaslighters. It means that we need to get good treatment for our ADHD.
Okay. Someone writes, we adopted a child from an orphanage before she was 2. She's always been manipulative and habitually lying. What can we do about that?
You want to go to a therapist that specializes in reactive attachment disorder, because that can be very common when you have a child that their formative years. So I mean, formative anytime from 0 to 5, if they were an orphanage, reactive attachment disorder can result from that. So I would talk to a therapist that specializes in that to see if that's an issue.
Okay. My 16-year-old daughter has the I can fix them mentality. How can I best respond to that in a way that she'll understand and stay away from these toxic individuals?
I think it's channeling it. I think a lot of people in helping professions, so that's teachers, medical profession, therapists, anyone that provides a service for people has an underlying wanting to make people better thing to them, right? Or else we wouldn't be in the jobs we were in. So I think it's channeling it and looking at, you know what, if you want to help people, that's great. Here's a healthy way to do it. Maybe you can volunteer doing something like a volunteer at a hospital. Sometimes hospitals have teenagers that will help there, or you can have the kids, what do they want to be when they grow up, basically, and kind of having them volunteer towards that area. So they channel that need to fix in another way. Some kids will work with animals. They will volunteer at a vet's office or volunteer at the Humane Society to help with that fixing feeling. And we talk about, when I talk with clients, it's that we don't want to fix, we can support. And that's what this looks like. Supporting looks like this. Fixing looks like this. We cannot make people feel a certain way. We cannot make people better, but we can certainly guide them or support them. And also it's important to talk to kids when they are kind of the quote unquote therapist to their friend group, because usually there's one kid that all the kids talk to. And it's really important to talk with your kid about how that's not their job. It's not their job. It may feel good that people go to you for help, but that's not your job as a teenager. Here's your job. Your job is go to school. Your job is to learn more about yourself. But if you find that you have a lot of friends coming to you, you don't always have to help them. that you can say, you know what, I really can't do that today. And we also talk about too, that when you set a boundary, the way someone reacts to your boundary doesn't mean you didn't have a right to set that boundary. In fact, if you set a boundary with a friend and they get upset with you, that actually is a sign that it was a good idea to set a boundary. A healthy friend appreciates a boundary and is glad they know where they stand with you.
What if someone writes, what if my child refuses to talk to a counselor or therapist?
Then you go with them, right? You go with them. And you say, okay, well, you don't want to go. The two of us are going. And sometimes there's consequences to that, right? If you don't want to go to the therapist, okay, well, you can't come home and gaming, or you can't, go online. If you're refusing to go to therapy, you don't get to do the fun stuff, right? This is, again, where we need to be more assertive. And again, you can go in and if your kid doesn't want to go in, go to the therapist yourself. I've gone out there are kids that won't go in the office because they're in a car, and I will go in the car with them. We'll do car therapy. I'll go, okay, so we can either sit in the car or we can go into my office that's air conditioned. Which one do you want? Right. So a good therapist will work with that and understand that a lot of kids don't want to go to therapy, but it's important that the therapist emphasizes, and a lot of good therapists know how to do this. They know to emphasize that this is not to punish you. This is not to tell you're a bad kid. It's just so you can talk to somebody about stuff, because there's a reason why stuff is happening. And it also has to do with two co-parents have to be on the same page where they both are okay with a kid going to therapy. Because if you have one co-parent that maybe they have gaslighting tendencies that doesn't want the kid to go to therapy, they may undermine it.
Oh, what do you do in a situation like that?
It's important to look at your parenting plan and see what the decision-making rules are on counseling, because usually your parenting plan will have a clause in there about medical decision-making and therapy decision-making. Mm-hmm. And it'll say whether a parent A or B has the decision-making power, or both of them have to agree, or somebody can override. And if that's not in there, then you probably want to consult with a family law attorney. Okay.
I love the idea of car therapy.
You got to meet kids where they're at. You got to meet people where they're at.
Mm-hmm. My daughter just came out of a toxic relationship. How can I best help her recover?
I think it's asking her, what does she need from you? What could I do for you right now? What's the best way I can help you right now? And your kid may be like, I just need you to listen. Or she may not know, but it's important just to spend time, just to share that space with somebody. Never underestimate the power of just sharing space with somebody. It could be that you guys are just watching a show together. That can be time for your kid to be around a healthy person. So you don't always have to pull out all the bells and whistles. It could be as simple, what's the best way I can help you?
Okay. Someone writes, my teen grew up with parents who model healthy and loving relationships, but yet she's so attracted to toxic friendships. How does that even happen?
That can be pretty common. Again, if you have someone that has a fixing or caregiving thing to them, and that could be that you're nurturing. And so that nurturing, and again, we have non-developed frontal lobes when we're that age. And again, with ADHD, we have less development. You may have a kid that the caretaking, their kids she kind of takes under her wing, right? The kids are having issues, so she's kind of drawn to them to help them. And again, it's channeling that and saying, you know what, it's okay to support people, but here's where I think that some things are changing, is that I noticed that your homework's not getting done, or you aren't coming home when you used to come home. And I wonder if maybe this person, I understand you really want to help them. But I wonder if this person may not be healthy. You can say, you know, it's not our job to fix people. We can care about people without it bringing us down. And that's the important thing to bring up, is that I think this person may make you not feel very good about yourself. And so maybe we need to change some things.
Okay, well, unfortunately, that has to be our last question because we're out of time. But Dr. Sarkis, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise with our ADHD community.
Oh, you are so welcome. Thank you, Carol. And thanks to everybody that attended.
And thank you to today's listeners. If you would like to access the event resources, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 497. The slides and recording are posted a few hours after each live webinar. If you're listening in replay mode, simply click on the episode description. Please know that our full library of Attitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts Podcast, and it's available on all streaming platforms. Make sure you don't miss future Attitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive free email newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. Have a great day, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
With everything you have on your plate, earning your degree online seems impossible. But at Grand Canyon University, we specialize in helping you fit a master's degree in business into your busy day. Your graduation team, led by your own GCU counselor, provides you with the personal support you need to succeed. Achieve your goals with a plan and team behind you. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.